Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Evelyn Burrell. I want to thank you for joining us today at 3 Psych Docs. Today, we're going to be talking about sex and sexuality. I'm really excited. Women empowerment. I have my shirt on from Black Luster, so I'm going to give a shout out to them. And before we get started, I want to introduce my awesome colleague and friend and peer, Dr. Angela Kinslow. Angela?
Hey,
Hi. How's it going?
It's going wonderful. I am, as you know, doing some of the tech in the background. So if I look at my phone, it's because we're trying to manage YouTube and our Facebook pages and all that good stuff. So I'm trying to make sure it says that we have one person watching right now. And I'm trying to make sure that that's not just me, because right now YouTube says that it's still waiting to go live.
Okay. I mean, it's kind of all about the process, trying to figure out the technological piece, which,
yes,
unfortunately, I'm not great at. But before we...
It's there.
All right, I see. Cool. Before we get super started, unfortunately, Dr. Michelle Milton will not be with us today. So she sends her love and she sends her, I'll be watching y'all from where I'm at. Let's see how it goes.
But she'll be with us next month.
Yeah, she'll absolutely be with us next month. So why don't we just go ahead and get started? I'm going to ask just to start the conversation, to have, to learn to start talking about sex. Really the big thing, when I hear about talking about sex and sex as a whole is, how come we don't talk about it?
Right. I think it is in American culture. So there's other cultures, specifically some various European cultures, where it's so much talked about. I know when I lived in Germany, sexuality just really wasn't a challenge. You would go to the public pool, and in the locker room, there'd be a naked man with his 5-year-old daughter as they're getting dressed to go swim in the pool. And it just wasn't a thing to be like, oh, there's a naked man in here. No, we're all getting dressed to go in the pool. But here in the US, it's such a taboo topic for mainstream culture. So again, I don't want to say that in like everyone in the US is taboo when talking about sex, but in general, it really is a taboo subject. I know in part of our pre-conversation, some of the things that we talked about, my having been in the Army and having to take many, many group showers with tons of women, sexuality or being naked or things of that nature isn't really that big of a deal for me, but it's because of how I was indoctrinated in my very young adult life. And there's some folks who are like, you got to keep everything covered up no matter around. So,
well, I was raised, I guess maybe conservative. It's not something that I ever really would have thought of one way or another. I didn't think about sex. I didn't really think about bodies, and I didn't think about, what one had and what other had. But I also had several brothers, and sisters. And so it's not like there was maybe a ton of curiosity about male anatomy or female anatomy, but I also didn't really learn much about, sex as maybe like a pleasure. But again, maybe not so much when I was younger, but as I got older, I started to kind of figure out like, okay, so maybe this, maybe this is a thing, but it's never really anything I spoke about or talked about often. And it was something that once I realized that this is really a human act, if we're talking about it from the actual engagement of sex, then what it turns into is the part of being human is sex. It goes hand in hand, whether we're having it or not, whether we have particular choices as far as who we're attracted to, or if we have a particular orientation, then it starts to become a larger discussion that also is still oddly quite taboo. And I don't understand all the time, I guess maybe in hindsight now as an adult, why it's so taboo, like why it's so natural. We eat, we sleep, we drink, and we have sex. I'll eat in front of people. I'll drink in front of people. I guess some people have sex.
We're not going to have sex.
Some people do.
Some people do.
Some people do. And then there's the group process.
Yeah, and I wish I remembered the name of the culture that where they just choose a sex partner, and it's just what was I wish I had it. I was reading some articles, and now I just can't remember the name of this particular culture. But their sex is so not taboo, and it is such a natural thing as eating and sleeping, that they'll just choose a sex partner, and you just go off and you have sex, and it's very common for adolescents to just be with this person for the day and somebody else for the next day, and that's just how it is. I think I want to back up a little bit when you were saying about learning about sex. One of the great things that I had growing up is in the 8th grade, was it 8th or 9th grade, my junior high school, Montgomery Junior High School in South San Diego, it's now Montgomery Middle, we had sex class. We had a sex class, and it was a full class. It wasn't like just a week, like this was your class. And we learned about the anatomy of sex. We learned, the genitalia. We learned good hygiene when it comes to your genitalia. We've learned, how to put on a condom. We learned, just vas deferens, ovaries, like really the very detailed. I always remember vas deferens from it was 8th grade. And then we had the class again in 10th grade once we went to high school. And so that's one thing that I can say that was great for that school system, is that for those of us who weren't learning at home, our parents still had to give permission to take this course. But for those of us who had parents who weren't comfortable teaching the actual anatomy of a male and female
bodies, yeah,
that we were able to learn that in school. And it took a lot of the stigma. When you see your teacher putting up slides with what oral sex looks like, just
I did not have that experience.
but it was very clinical. So it wasn't pornographic.
Right.
Just like how you're chuckling, we chuckled, we're kids. But I think it does really well the more education that we provide to our youth, right? Age appropriate, but the more education we provide to our youth, then we're going to help keep down on, unwanted pregnancies or surprise pregnancies, because now kids know, like, oh, okay, here's this banana or this cucumber. I know how to put on a condom. But it's not just the boy learning how to put on a condom. It's a girl learning how to put on a condom. So then, as we talk about empowerment, as women, we're able to say, no, you're going to put on a condom, or put the condom on the partner, right? To make sure that I'm safe from STDs, I'm safe from, not fully safe, but as we know, as much as we can be. But keeping ourselves safe, whether having a penis or a vagina, you should know how to do these things. And so I think that's something that as we become more in tune with educating our youth, whether it's at school or in programs, or parents are able to become comfortable, then we're protecting our youth again from having those unwanted pregnancies, having STDs that stay with you for a little bit, or STDs that
forever. Yeah, I agree. I think back to maybe how I learned, and in my education as a psychologist, and I work a lot with sexual offenders, and one thing that we've kind of learned, especially at a younger age, is the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding about what sex is, how to engage with someone, how to ask someone out even on a date, and getting these ideas from porn, getting these ideas from each other. Difficulty with talking about sex, especially with younger people, again, age appropriate, telling your 5-year-old, hey, this is a vagina, this is a penis, these are breasts, and having those conversations. These are, if you need to go to the bathroom, this person can help you, but these people, let me know if they do anything kind of funky, and I'm always going to be on your side. I'm always here to protect you. You can tell me anything, you can ask me anything. And starting to coach kind of and teach your children about their own bodies. and about being able to protect their own bodies, be able to say no, to people, and then feel comfortable enough to come to you or another trusted adult, even if it's another child. Sometimes it's another child, a same age peer who's acting out sexually, right. And even like within the school systems, or even at home or in your own backyard. So I think that it gets it becomes very difficult because we assume that sex is an adult issue or maybe an adolescent issue. But fact of the matter is you're born with all the parts, right. Like it's all there. Right. I remember the first time I was changing my son, I was like, oh, like that happens young, and he figured it out very early. And I'm like, okay, so the male penis thing starts immediately, right? Well, like, there it is. And it's a toy for the rest of their lives. I don't know.
Yeah, they do discover. I mean, it's so talking about, and this is going to sound odd talking about a young, so I'm going to change it. But masturbation, right? Masturbation, self-pleasure is a very natural thing. And again, I know we're talking against some cultural norms, right? There's some folks who would say, do not masturbate. Self-pleasure is not appropriate. When actually, if you don't know how to pleasure yourself, if you aren't familiar with what feels good to you, how do you then educate your partner as to what's good for you, right? There's women who have never looked at their vagina, and it's like, no, open your legs, get a mirror, and become familiar with what you look like. This is part of your body. Men, it's a little bit easier, right? They're able to see it, but what does your scrotum look like? Like, again, open your legs, take a mirror, and really understand what your anatomy looks like, and how it feels good to have pleasure. And then that way, again, you're able to educate that partner. There's a really good video. You can see it on YouTube. And if you put in YouTube, it's like clitoris, vagina, puppet, clitoris, G-spot, something like that. If you Google that, it'll pop up, and it's this lady that someone who happened to catch with a cell phone camera, and she gives a really good education about how the female genitalia is with the G-spot and how the clitoris really is, and it's something that I believe everyone should know, whether you have a vagina or a penis, right? Unless you're a person who will never, ever, ever touch a vagina, then it probably doesn't really matter, right? There's some people who just will never touch a vagina or see a vagina. But if you are a person who does, it's a really good video. It's very educational. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's good to have the education regardless of whether or not you ever plan to touch one.
Yeah. There are some people who just have absolute no interest in vaginas.
Yes.
Be like, why would I look at that?
Right. I mean, I can recognize maybe like asexuality or a lack of interest in sex and sexual engagement. I think I think that what we're talking to is anatomy and knowledge of anatomy of your bodies, of the bodies of others, and it allows us to normalize some of these things, right? Like we don't want vaginas to be scary. We don't want penises to be like these scary things. Like they're part of us, and they do stuff.
Yeah, I guess I was talking about people someone who has a penis who prefers to have sex with somebody else who has a penis. Like they're never going to see a vagina. I was talking more about those people.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I was following kind of your logic. My I guess counter to that is really just education and recognizing the different physical components of yourself and of other people. And it takes away maybe some of the scariness. It takes away maybe some of the mystery, and it allows for this kind of normalizing of the process. In America, we're not getting, when we see sex, we don't know what to do with it. So if we see sex through porn, but we don't understand it in a normal kind of expected interaction, then we don't know how to interact sexually because we're getting it from an idea that's convoluted. And so for me, I'm like, yeah, it's just it's the educating yourself, whether or not you ever intend on actually touching a penis or a vagina, or whether you have like actual interest in those things as sexual objects or sexual things. It's adding for the education and being able to say, well, yeah, I know what it is. I mean, I don't really maybe care overall to handle it, but I do know what it is and what it does.
You said something really, you mentioned porn.
Right.
And that is a challenge. That is a challenge, one, now because it's so accessible. I know when I was in the 5th grade, there was a lady, an older, she's probably in her 20s, single young lady who lived very close to us. And she would show us dirty magazines, right? And we were like, oh, I'm 10 looking at magazines. And that was like, but now kids aren't looking at magazines.
No.
They're looking at full on pornography. They're looking at sex that's, I'm not saying the sex that's in porn is bad sex, because for some people that's good sex.
Right.
But I think being introduced to sex in that way is not the most appropriate introduction to sex, because pornography sex typically, unless it's like soft porn, but pornography sex is more fetish. It doesn't teach people how to really make love. It's, you know, and so for those who, you know, there's grown ups who've never really taken the time to actually learn how to be pleasurable, back to the anatomy, right? And because of what they've seen on pornography, or what big brother or big sister has said, hey, this is what's good because of what they saw on porn, you have a lot of people going around and just really having bad sex. And, you know, I've met women who have been in marriages, you know, for 20 years and did not know they had never had an orgasm until that marriage broke up, and then they had a new lover. And then,
oh, that's what that is.
This is why people like sex. This is orgasm.
Like, if only someone had taught you this in your marriage.
And so that's why it's really, really important to have a good understanding. You know, we study money, we study how to cook, right? We get recipes, we go on YouTube, we learn these things. You and I have completed doctoral programs, and we're, you know, experts on the brain and thinking and behavior, but then people don't study sex.
Right.
Like, it's one of the, it's how we keep the world populated. Like, everybody's doing it and we don't study it. Like, I think it's the penis has about 4,000 nerve endings on the tip. The clitoris has 8,000 nerve endings. Like, this was created to be pleasurable. And
superpower.
Right.
The nerve endings.
Right. But I mean, so we should really take the time to educate ourselves to make it the most pleasurable. I mean, we're going to do it anyway. It should still feel good. So I'm going to check, while you talk a little bit, I'm going to check and see if there's any comments anywhere, because we're asking people to ask questions. And so I'm going to just kind of look on some of the social media profiles to see if there's any questions out there. So guys, please ask us questions. We want this to be a very interactive, not just a dialogue between the two of us, but if you have any questions, ask us. I know there was one statement. Yeah, or statements, and then we can on that. I know that there was something that was asked previously and that we're going to address about talking about women empowerment, which we'll get into, but talking about sex, sexuality, and women empowerment, someone made an assumption that that meant we were going to bash men.
Yeah.
That is absolutely not so. And it kind of hurt my heart a little bit to think that because we're speaking about empowering women, that meant the opposite of we have to bash, like that polarizing thinking that we have to then bash men. And then the person said they were joking, and that's fine. But unfortunately, outside of that person, there's people who really think that way, that in order to say this is good, it's kind of like, you know, this is good, so then the opposite has to occur, when really we can talk about women empowerment and we can talk about how great men are.
Right.
So, okay.
I guess so when you make that comment, I think about, well, I'm not really sure, and this might be a little taboo or maybe strange to say, but I'm not really sure what men have to do with sex when it comes to women, or even, as far as like the pleasure, right? So I get that, man, woman, make baby. But as far as engaging in pleasurable activities and enjoying sex for what it is, and recognizing that yes, sex is for procreation, but it's also for love. It's also for pleasure. It's also to maybe create some, empathy as far as like how you interact with each other and care for each other within your relationship. It changes. Sex is dynamic. You may be engaging in it often sometimes and maybe not very much on other times. It's emotional. And so for me, I'm like the sex can be very individualized. What you want 1 minute might be different the next day, and the mood might shift from one thing to another. And so when I read the comment or the question, I thought, well, I get that the act of sexual intercourse is between two people, but sex, as far as how we think about it, how we respond to it, how we feel about it, what our thoughts and concerns are about it are very, very individualized. And you ultimately hope to find someone that maybe has, maybe some of those parallel kind of ideas or desires, and that you come together and you find a good sexual partner, but your experiences of sex are still going to be your own experiences. And we're allowed to have our own experiences as opposite of each other. In a sexual relationship, hopefully there's enough communication where you can kind of pull those things together and you can be compatible in it. But ultimately, what one person thinks about it can be very different from the next, and one person's experiences can be very different from the next. So I found it kind of interesting that are you going to be bashing men? I'm like, I don't understand what men specifically have to do with female sex, other than maybe this historical or societal kind of concept that men allow for the female sex, right? Is that historically, women have been sex objects for men, and they're for men for their sexual pleasures. And the shift of female empowerment and female sexuality, and the little pussy hats. I have a hard time saying that word. Sorry, I
haven't seen these hats.
Huh?
I've not seen these hats.
No, they're from like the anti-Trump, like the women in power little hats that.
Oh, I don't remember these.
You haven't seen them? Oh, you should get you one. It's one of those knit hats.
So I have a vagina T-shirt, and it's bedazzled. The Vagina Monologues is a play that was written, and I had the pleasure of directing a pretty good sized production of it here in Arizona. And Felicia Davis, who was the producer of that production here, she, as a director, gave me this big bedazzled.
Why didn't you wear that today?
I didn't think about it, right? Like, it is beautiful. Felicia, I'm so sorry I didn't wear your T-shirt today.
You can wear it next time.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, but
you've totally done that.
Yeah, and so if anyone hasn't ever read that play or seen that play, definitely, see if you can find that. They're great women empowerment, and it's various women's experiences with sexuality. So one of the things that, going back to men, is, there's these stereotypes that have been created around for men and penis size, right? And so I think oftentimes we make these statements, women and men, about the value of a man based on the size of his penis.
Right.
And especially in Black culture, right, which really comes, it's emasculating. It comes back from slave culture of, who can breed and who can't. But some people aren't going to agree with this. Penis size does matter, but vagina size matters also. So just like the sizes of penises are different, the same with, and I'm not talking about how people make stereotypical statements about vaginas with, tightness and closeness. I'm talking about the depth of the vaginal canal. So from the opening of the vagina all the way back to the cervix, those also are different. And so, yes, if a man has a smaller penis and a woman has more depth, that may not be a good fit if she likes to have her cervix hit, right? For a woman who has a more, not narrow, but shallow depth, and a man who's longer, that may not fit either, because he's not going to be able to get his full shaft into that penis because it's going to hit that cervix too soon, right? And so that's why I say penis size does matter based on the size of the vagina. Vagina size does matter based on the size of that penis. And so, but we have to really get out of emasculating men and saying, you know, if you have a small penis, then you're not worthy as a man. Like, no, I can still pleasure you. The G spot, so on a woman, on a woman's vagina, so the G spot is really just right here anyway. And so you want that penis hitting there. So if the man is a good sexual partner, the person with the penis, if the person with the penis is a good sexual partner, they're going to hit that G spot no matter the size, and it's going to be good. When the person is just going like this, that's not really hitting that G spot, right? If the G spot is here, so it's the top of the vagina. So if the woman is lying on her back, the person with the vagina is lying on their back. So when you're coming down like that, that's not doing anything. It's lifting up the hips and then being able to hit this way. So really, the penis size wouldn't matter if the person is able to hit the top of that penis to the G spot. But then there's also, for some women, this is something that my gynecologist said to me, which was amazing. He said that there's 3 types, these are his words, there's 3 types of women. And he was talking about the cervix, so the penis hitting the cervix. And he said there's a woman that when that penis hits the cervix, that she's like, oh, that hurts so good, right? This is my gynecologist talking to me. And then he said, then there's
still wrapping my head around you having a male gynecologist. I'm like,
oh, yeah. And then he says, then there's the type of woman who says, oh, that hurts too bad. And then there's the woman who it's neither here nor there, right? When it hits that cervix. And so that's something that women have to think about sexually when they're thinking about their health, because if you have a hysterectomy, do you know, what's the reason for having the hysterectomy? You know, the medical reason, you know, do you keep your cervix? Do you let them take your cervix as a preventative measure to ensure you don't ever get cervical cancer? And so that's something to really take into consideration, that if you're the woman who's like, ooh, this hurts so good, and now you don't have a cervix anymore, that is gone. That part of your sexual pleasure is gone. But if you're that woman who's like, it doesn't matter, or ooh, this hurts so bad, then that cervix missing is like, okay, this is better. So just things to really think about, again, back to emasculating men by saying penis size matters. Well, it does, but again, it matters based on the size of the vagina that it's going.
And in the simplest form, we're talking lock and key.
Yeah.
You know, that there's a match or there's a fit for each person. And so ultimately, for your own sexual pleasure, you want someone who matches your sexual needs and your physical, you know, anatomy. Yeah. And then if you're engaging with someone sexually who doesn't match that, one end or another, and vice versa, then there's not going to be pleasure, which brings about some of those other issues. Like, what if you like this person for other reasons? Hopefully you do like them for other reasons, right? So what if they're funny and interesting and they treat you well and they make you feel good and your life is better, right? You're like, this person improves who I am as a person and what I want to do with my life, and sexually we're not quite compatible. This lock and key as far as the sexual component is missing, and how to kind of work through those things and go through that process. And I mean, sex therapy can work wonders, and engaging with a sex therapist and learning about your anatomy and learning about how to still, receive and gain pleasure, or other, there's tons of other options out there that I think that again, as people, because we don't talk about sex, social, and we don't have the social kind of process of talking about sex, is that we don't recognize that there actually might be answers out there that says, okay, this person treats you well, you enjoy their time, you're dating them, or, maybe you're friends with benefits or whatever, title or no title that might be going on. And there's a missing piece, but if we don't recognize that we can actually work through those missing pieces and that there's other options to engage sexually, then we end up, sexually kind of miserable. And we're like, okay, they're great, but there's this huge thing that's missing. And what we know in relationships is sex, kids, and money. If we're talking about it from a relational standpoint, those are the kind of three biggies. And if
all three of those need excellent communication,
right?
Excellent communication and, emotional intelligence. Again, that it goes back to if I, as a woman, tell my male partner, hey, this is when you do this doesn't necessarily feel good, but when you do this does, those conversations in our culture can be very difficult because, again, we tell men that the measure of the man is based on how they're able to pleasure a woman, when that's really not how we measuring a man, right? And so being able to be vulnerable and open and having those conversations and it not then hurt our, what in general terms, ego, right? But the same thing with money, same thing with how do you raise your children? It's down to communication, being comfortable, having what some people view as uncomfortable conversations. But this too, now, back in the day, people married as virgins.
Right? Air quote virgins.
Virgins.
Yeah, okay.
But now it's not very normal anymore, or the average, where you are with someone who's never been with somebody else. And so, especially if you've been in a long-term relationship, that those two sexual partners know what each other likes. And then now you have this new partner and you're doing things that old partner likes, and this new partner is doing what their old partner likes. And so you have to be able to say, well, that's not us. Like, we'll come together, and what is it that we enjoy together? And sometimes it's tough, right? Because who wants to talk about sex with your partner about their old partner? And you don't have to have specific conversations like, well, what did he do? Or what did she do? What in the past have you found pleasurable? What in the past have you not found pleasurable? What have you tried? What are you still willing to try? What are your fantasies, right? Have you fulfilled those? Have you not? Like, what are the things that you want when it comes to a sexual relationship? And that helps to really keep relationships in general healthy.
Absolutely. And it's not that the conversation isn't always easy, because we still have to speak about blatant and basic compatibility. So if someone, if we bring the financial component in, if people aren't financially compatible, if you have a spender and a saver and they don't talk about money, they're not going to be okay. Right? It's very hard when you have one person who's maybe more financially responsible and the other person who's kind of, goes off on whims and leaves the more responsible person in the dust, right? So then you start having these issues. So we always want to have those compatible kind of conversations and interactions as well. If you're raising your children and one person is, iron fist kind of raising and the other person is very passive, that child is going to have a rough time trying to figure out the dynamics of their parent. And puts them in kind of a different position of trying to figure out how their parent is parenting them. So it's this, we see that similar process when it comes to sex. Is like, okay, like making sure that you're with someone that you're compatible with, that's pleasurable, but also recognizing that you need to communicate what those needs are and be willing to look at other resources and be able to say, okay, what's out there for me and what's available. So earlier you mentioned, learning about how to put on a condom. And my main thought went to resources, right? Condoms are expensive. unless you know where to get them.
Right.
You know, so if you're a teenager and you decide, or, you know, anyone really, if you're someone who decides that you want to have sex and you need condoms, and and you go to the store up the street and you don't have the kind of cash for those condoms, and then you say, well, whatever, we'll pull out, or I mean, not go all in, whatever people say these days. Then it turns into, well, what's more expensive? Abortions and babies.
Right.
What's more than condom? And the resources of what's available. A lot of health clinics have free condoms. Planned Parenthood typically has free condoms. You might have, you know, a parent who is, or an older adult who's trusting that might, you know, have condoms or whatever that they'd be willing to offer or give. There's certain school. I remember being in school in my health class in junior high, and she's like, here, and she puts a whole bucket of condoms out, and, you know, we all walked past them scared. I was like 14, you know, and kind of went on our way. But, you know, a lot of times when we talk about, you know, healthy sex and sexuality, we really need to be thoughtful about what resources are available to us as well regarding birth control and protection, and realizing that there's actually a lot of places that are available to us that will offer those things without insurance, without, or maybe on a sliding fee or a sliding scale. So recognizing that if you're not sure, or if there is a significant cost that comes with sex, whether it's physical or financial, there's costs and consequences to everything. You know, a consequence to sex could be an STD or pregnancy. That's something that we need to be thoughtful about when we're engaging, that this is what happens. Sex is to procreate. And if your partner isn't managing themselves, and if they're not getting themselves checked, or if they're engaging in, you know, open or maybe negative or troubling or problematic sex practices, and ultimately that comes to you, you know, and then you have to deal with whatever those consequences are as well.
You mentioned something, and it made me think about, you know, that you're 13 and the teacher throws these condoms down. We have a lot of, I've heard a lot of parents over the years say, well, I don't want to have the conversation about sex. I don't want to provide preventative measures, because then now my kid's going to go out and have sex. When really the research, the literature, the evidence-based literature says opposite. When we have those conversations with our children, then they're less likely to engage in sexual activity, because now they better understand the consequences, right? If I make condoms available to my sons and daughters, it doesn't mean that now, oh gosh, you're a virgin, and now I'm telling them you have permission to go have sex. No, they're going to have sex if they want to or not. But now, if they want to, they have the ability to keep themselves safe. And so it's really important as parents, and it can be difficult and it can be embarrassing, and, you know, you might not know what to say, but we have to have these conversations with our children, you know, especially those who are post-pubescent, so girls who are now menstruating, and, you know, so around 12, right? 12, 13 with girls and boys, having these conversations, because if you don't tell your daughter how sex happens, and then some boy is like, hey, let me come put my car in your garage.
Right? And use real language, not car and garage with penis and vagina.
You know, boy, like, let me come put my car in your garage. Yeah, this is what goes on. And then now you got this 12, 13-year-old girl who's pregnant because she didn't know that when you put a penis inside of a vagina and that penis ejaculates or doesn't, right? You don't even have to ejaculate because there's ejaculate. Babies still come, that you can prevent. We just have, I lost my train of thought, but we have to provide that education, and providing the education doesn't say, yes, go have sex. It now makes you educated. And again, the research tells us that then there's less sex, there's less consequences, there's less STDs, and then there's less unwanted or surprise pregnancy.
Right. And adolescents, I mean, people are engaging in sex younger and younger, and they're creative as hell. Man, some of the stuff that teenagers come up with these days are impressive. And, you know, this idea of like, well, they can't do this in my home. They will find someplace else, a party, a garage, a backyard, a canal. Like, they'll find someplace else to be able to engage in these acts if they're at a point in their in their development that they want to engage in sex, and they're going to engage in sex. And so really working to limit some of the issues. I had someone comment asking me a question regarding, sex, and talking about sex with their teenager who was ready to have sex. So the teenager came to the mom and said, I'm ready. I want to have sex with my boyfriend, and like, let's get on birth control. So very responsible.
Kudos, first of all, to that parent. Your child was comfortable.
Super responsible child, super awesome. That the child was very comfortable talking about parent. My thought was, well, did you let your child know that once they engage in sex, then it's over, right? Like, once you do sex and once you have sex, and sex becomes a thing and it becomes part of your life. When I was younger.
What do you mean it's over?
I mean, your virginity is gone, and now it becomes part of your relationship. So I don't mean over like your life is over. I mean, it starts to become part of your relationship. So are you ready to engage in sex within your relationship? Or is this a one-time thing? Are you saying, I'm ready to lose my virginity with this person that I enjoy and that I really like? Or are you saying, I'm ready to bring sex into my relationship with this person, and then potentially the next person, if there is another person? I'm ready to start engaging in sex as a practice in my relationships. So to me, that it's that bigger kind of process of, is this what you're ready for? It's kind of like when you get your first job. Like, it's once you start working, it's hard not to work anymore, because now you have that income. And then when it goes away, you're like, well, wait a minute. I want to be able to keep working because I'm now used to having money. And we see the same thing with sex, is once we say, okay, I'm ready to start engaging in sex, then sex starts to become the practice in your relationships.
Yeah. But I do want to counter that a little bit. There's people who will engage in sex and then say, you know what, I want to abstain for a while and be celibate for whatever reasons. You might have someone who's in relationship with this person who, like, we had amazing, wonderful sex, and now in this next relationship, I don't want to have sex.
That's where we start to see that, though. We start to see those kind of like advanced thought processes in adulthood.
Yeah.
So when someone says, I'm actually going to abstain, typically we're talking about someone who's an adult. And so if an adolescent is going to engage in sex, do we have an adolescent who is able to also have those conversations with their partner and say, you know what, I did it, but I want to just keep dating you, and I just want to continue to be with you in that, but I don't want to have sex with you anymore. So it's that emotional maturity, and be able to say, that wasn't comfortable. I actually wasn't as ready as I thought I was, and I want to back up. And so does each person, right, in the sexual partnership have the maturity,
right,
emotionally, to be able to abstain at that point? And so sometimes with children, in adolescence, we don't see that emotional kind of process. And so part of that conversation with children is, when you're ready, you have to be ready, right, to engage this, or to be able to have the emotional intelligence in the conversation. If you decide not to do it, to be able to stand your ground and say, I actually don't want to do this anymore, and it's okay for me to not want to do this anymore. And there's nothing wrong with me not wanting to do this anymore, because I'm making a decision about my body and what I allow for my body to do. And I'm deciding that I don't want my body to engage in this at this point. And to know that it's okay. And
that exactly what you're saying can be, even if you're in the midst of foreplay and you've had penetrative sex, and now you say, you know what, no, I don't want penetrative sex. You can say no right then.
Right. You can say no in the middle. You could be already penetrated and say, actually, I don't feel like doing this anymore, and stop.
And that can become a challenge, especially with adults who have sexual appetites where it might be where you role play, right? So if you're a role player and you're telling the person, no, but that's in the role play because someone has those types of desires, then it's coming up with a safe word. If no doesn't mean no for you with your partner, then coming up, maybe it's crickets, right? So if I say crickets, then I mean to stop, that this is beyond my threshhold.
Gosh, I think it's like the worst safe word ever. I'm like, I hear crickets, and I'm like, I hear.
Right, because you're not going to say. So I'm thinking of a word that you would not say during sex.
During sex. I know. I'm just giving you.
I don't know, toothpaste, hairbrush. But you need to be safe.
Anything else other than crickets.
Because a partner might say stop, don't, but that might just be their own. They might not really mean no. But if you've never established a safe word and your partner says no, then it absolutely means no, or if they stop, it means stop. But if you've had a prior conversation that, hey, I might say no, I might say stop, don't stop unless I say this word, and this is my safe word. This is my word that really means no. So it's having, again, communication and being able to talk openly about these are the things that I like, these are the things that I don't like, and we can push the limit on this. And if I say crickets or toothpaste or braces, whatever it is that your safe word is, then that means, hey, we need to take a time out and stop.
Right.
So there was something else I wanted to talk about that I learned from that video, the puppet video, and how the clitoris puppet video, the clitoris puppet.
Yeah, the one that you were talking about. I just haven't seen it, so I'm just thinking.
Oh, you have to watch it.
I'll have to watch it.
Yeah, you have to watch it. It's on YouTube.
Okay.
I know I sent it to you.
Did you? When did you do that?
I watched it and said, wow. I sent it to you and Dr. Melton. And I was like, ooh, if we could only.
Did I see it? I don't remember.
You would know. Okay. But one of the things that the woman on this video talked about was how Magnum condoms are marketed to the Black community, and they're supposed to be larger. Again, the emasculation of Black men and saying that they have larger penises, stereotypes that just aren't true, because the penis size varies, right? But what she was saying was that Magnum condoms are more expensive and that they're really thick, so it takes away a lot of the pleasure. So just something to be mindful as to how things are marketed to you, that, having a Magnum condom actually is costing you more money and it's giving you less pleasure.
Just so you can feel bigger.
Yeah.
So you can be like, look what I purchased.
Yeah. So you don't need to do that. But also for the woman, the person with the vagina, know what kind of condom that the person with the penis is using, because there's lambskin, right? Mm-hmm. So this person is saying, hey, I don't want to have a baby, but with lambskin, I can still pass an STD to you. So you definitely want to know what type of condom is being used, so that way you're having that open conversation. If you're okay with your partner and you guys are just trying to not have kids, but you're safe and trusting when it comes to sex otherwise, then lambskin is absolutely.
Do people still use lambskin other than maybe from any kind of, and honestly, I'm hearing you talk about lambskin and I'm thinking other than being maybe having an allergy, I don't know. Like, I feel like if you're allergic to latex, then you use lambskin, but I don't know if it's typically practiced lambskin, but I guess I never thought to ask when I was younger.
This right here says natural lamb luxury condoms on Amazon. I'm not endorsing any type of condom. But it does on here, it says STI protection. I don't know, but that's changed. Yeah. So just be mindful of what type of condom is being used. So yeah.
Or being willing to buy your own, like as a woman, if you have a particular brand that you prefer for, pleasurable reasons, and it's fine to purchase condoms for your partner as well, or for, your own sexual pleasure. So it's, I think we get into this idea that men are supposed to purchase and decide condoms because they use those, and women have to figure out everything else, really. But recognizing that if there are certain things that you find pleasurable, then it's fine to request it. It's fine to say, hey, actually, I like these, and these are the ones that I keep because of whatever reason.
And there's actually what's referred to as female condoms also that can be used, so that's inserted into the vagina rather than going on to the penis. And also oral sex, right? So you have to have these conversations. And are we going to have oral sex, on the vagina with a dental dam, or is it just free willy and we're good to go? Are you going to have oral sex on the penis with something covering or not? And so those are also conversations to have.
Right. And to realize that you can still get STIs and STDs from oral sex in your mouth, and some of them last forever. Not always from sex, like herpes or oral herpes isn't always passed down because of sex, but that if you have oral herpes and then you perform oral sex, then you could very easily hand that off.
Yeah. And so, and also most people, I forget the percentage, but it's well over 50% of people actually test positive for having HSV, herpes simplex virus. Mm-hmm. Just not everybody gets outbreaks, whether it be outbreaks in the genital area or cold sores. And so it's a very widespread STI that the majority of the population has. Right. So, and we also have to take those stigmas away, right?
It's kind of like HPV. So again, like that widespread issue that majority of the population has to some degree. I mean, they have vaccines for it now, maybe with the last like 15 years or so. Mm-hmm. But again, it's part of the consequences of not protecting yourself or engaging in sex without actually considerate of what sex is. And again, I don't want to keep using that term consequences, but some of the consequences from sex. There's a lot of pleasure. There's a lot of excitement. Again, it brings about maybe unity and connection with your own body and with your partner or partners. But we also have to make sure that we're being really thoughtful about it, that we're offering insight and knowledge and communication and what our wants, what our needs are, what our desires are, what our expectations are, and being able to engage appropriately.
Yeah. I think this has been a great conversation. We're going on 52 minutes now, and I haven't seen any questions from anyone.
So I see some comments kind of going on, but no questions. Are you relooking?
I am.
I know that we, so for those of you who are watching, we plan to continue this conversation in our next 3 Psych Docs. So we're going to be meeting again the last Sunday of the month in September. So I believe that's the 27th at the same time, 12:30. And in our next conversation, we're going to be talking more about, sexual orientation. We want to have that conversation, but we also want Dr. Milton to very much so be there for that part of the conversation. And so we decided to table it a little bit today until she could be with us next week. But also next month, sorry. What is consent? How do you engage in sex in an appropriate agreement? What if you're not consenting? Do we understand kind of what some of the laws behind that are? So it might be a good conversation if you do have young people in your lives, adolescents, young adults in your lives who might be able to join. So in a lot of the work that I do, I talk about, sex and consent and the act of sex,
And assent.
Assent, yes, absolutely. And one thing that I've learned in my time as a psychologist and even as a student in my training is because of some of the conversation that we're having today that people aren't having with their parents. They're learning it from other avenues such as pornography or their friends who are gain their knowledge from God knows who. And so people are talking about sex and the act of sex and engagement without really having the tools and the foundation and the legal knowledge of what is consent and how can someone actually actively agree to engage with you. So we'll talk about that more next month. And so again, if you have young people, I suggest you have them watch.
And let me explain the reason why it's important. And so Dr. Burrell, Dr. Evelyn this is her expertise when it comes to the legalities of sex, sex offenses. I had an opportunity for just 1 year to work with those who have been civilly committed after serving prison time. So there's a program here called PCT, Arizona Community Protection Treatment
and Protection.
Yeah.
Protection and Treatment, ACPTC.
Yeah, ACPTC.
Protection first, yeah.
So this is a program here in Arizona. I actually call it double jeopardy, but people who have been registered as sex offenders, they complete their prison time. And then once they're released from prison, they aren't released back into the community. They're civilly committed into this program. So I only did that for 1 year, but Dr. Burrell has an amazing amount of expertise when it comes to the legalities of what consent is, what assent is. And so I truly, earnestly ask that those of you who have youth, who have children, who have nieces and nephews, who have neighbors, to really tune into next week, or now I'm saying week.
Right. Next month, whatever.
Because it's really important information. You know, simple things like if you have sex in a park and you get caught, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and there's no kids around, you now have a very high possibility of being registered as a sex offender. If you're 17 and your partner is 18, and even though it's 2 weeks apart, it's age appropriate, but it's a high likelihood that that 18-year-old can have to register as a sex offender because they have.
It also depends on state,
Arizona. We're talking about Arizona. And so for those of you outside of Arizona, you'll definitely have to figure out what the laws are. They talk about age appropriate. So 18 and 17, 2 weeks apart, that's age appropriate. Arizona, that 17-year-old cannot give consent unless they're married. And then they have to get their parents' permission to get married. So if they're married,
my parent can give consent.
Yeah. So we'll definitely have that conversation. So I do ask that you tune in. This has been a great conversation. You know, we've talked about trying to just really we try to really model how to talk about sex and it not be taboo.
Right.
That's what we have to be able to do in relationships, even in friendship groups. So women often talk about sex with women. I don't know if men talk about sex with men outside of some of the stereotypes of what we as women hear about what men talk about. But I know as women, when we get in groups, we will have conversations. And so now it's being able to have that co-ed conversation, have these public conversations to really just have education and help relationships.
Right, because what we want to be able to do is normalize the conversation so that it doesn't become or continue to become deviant, or unknowledgeable or tripped on, for lack of a better phrase. You don't want to fall on it and learn something like this the hard way. There are certain things that we stumble through and that we learn and that we come out kind of okay, but there are certain things that if you play around with it without the knowledge or the skill can be dangerous, and it can be a problem. Like sex can kill us, and it has killed people. So it can be quite a dangerous interaction and engagement if we don't actually think about it and talk about it and learn about it. If we don't talk to our children about it and our adolescents about it, if we don't talk to our partners about it, if we don't talk to our medical doctors, OBGYNs. I'm not one to have a male OBGYN. I'm still kind of like what? Like, you chose that? I'll always go to a female. But for my own comfort. But even that, like how to choose an OBGYN, they're going to be all up in your stuff,
Yeah.
So
can I tell a funny story? Do we have to? Let me tell
a little bit. If it's quick.
Story. So again, as most people know, I was in the Army. And so as a young adult, the first time I ever went to a GYN was in the Army. And back then, it was whatever person was available. So I always had every checkup was somebody different until I got, even when I was pregnant, every checkup was pretty much somebody different. So it wasn't a personal experience. I didn't get to know that person. And so when I get out of the Army, I find a provider. His name was Dr. Jeffrey Gustafson, and he's my and my son's provider. He's our primary care doctor, right? And so he was great. He was amazing. He knows my son. He knows me. I come get my physicals and all this stuff. And so back then, just like now, oftentimes you have to get a referral. So you go and you see your provider so you can get a referral. So now it's time for me. I had Norplant. Mm-hmm. And so it's time to get that out, and I need to get my physical, and so I go in, and the nurse says, "Okay, put on your gown," and I was like, "No, I'm here for a referral." And he's like, "Oh no, Dr. Gustafson does the pap smears and all that." I was like, "Wait, what?" It was beautiful. And this was back in the day when I was still going out to nightclubs, and we had conversations. He goes to nightclubs in Scottsdale. I was going to Jets and Sticks. He would go to Jets and Sticks. I hadn't seen him there, but I know through conversation this is what he does. So I get on the table. I am so uncomfortable because this is my first time where I know you. And the nurse is right here. He's down there. I'm in the stirrups. And then I just start cracking up. And I was like, "You're going to know my face to my stuff." Right? Turn as red as my lips. The nurse laughs. He laughs. Because I had never had someone where it was consistent like that.
Right.
That broke the ice, and I never saw him out, so that was okay. And then he ended up moving out of state, so I didn't get to keep him as my provider. But all that to say, I'm very comfortable with the man being my gynecologist. But again, I think a lot of the experiences of me having such a high level of comfort, again, being naked in front of other people, or having a male gynecologist, was because I didn't have those choices. I didn't get to choose for myself when I was in the Army who my provider was going to be. And again, it was always somebody different. And so I didn't even think twice about having a male primary provider. And I wouldn't have thought twice about having a male GYN. And it just so happened that my male primary provider ended up also doing that. So
I'll share 2 short stories and then we'll wrap up, because every now and then as a kid, someone jacks you up and it sticks with you longer than you'd like to admit. So when I was a child, I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade, we were talking about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And there was a kid, a boy that was sitting next to me, and the teacher's like, "Oh, what do you want to be?" And he's like, "I want to be a gynecologist." And, she's like, "Oh, okay, good for you." And goes on to the next person. And then he turns to me and he's like, "That way I can look at pussies all day." And I was like, "Oh my God." And my brain went to, I connected, right? Men do this because they're nasty. And I'm not saying that I still believe that, but what I'm saying is that I got to that point where I was like, well, I don't want to have a male gynecologist. And so when I was pregnant and I was really shopping again for a gynecologist, one thing that had me choose the person that I did choose, because we went to a couple different physicians, but she was an older woman, and she sat down. She was wearing her, whatever doctor thing that they wear. I'm losing my train of thought, but she sat up on the table that was across from me, and I could see her panties, like she was wearing a dress, and then she was wearing her coat, and she sat up on the table to talk to me, and I was like panty view, and my husband was like panty view, and we talked and we went through everything and we left. I was like, "I'm choosing her," and he's like, "Did you not see her panties?" I was like, "I did." And she showed me hers, and I'm going to show her mine, and we'll be good. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want. And my OBGYN, I feel so much better. And I was so excited, and she was so amazing. And she was such a great choice. I just was like, yes, this is the person that I want. If I'm going to be carrying these twins and I got to be in, then I'm like, at least I feel more comfortable, and because she felt comfortable, you know what I meant? So I could see her comfort. So I felt really good about it. So either way, pick who makes you feel comfortable in whatever way and go from there. Male, female, old, young, whatever. Just make sure you're good and you feel taken care of. Yeah. All right. So then we will see you guys.
A secret to men, though.
Huh?
I will tell men a secret.
Oh.
Most of us, no matter how many times we have been to the gynecologist, how many kids we've had, it doesn't matter. The whole putting our legs in a stirrup and the gynecologist saying, "Scoot down, open your knees," never becomes comfortable.
Yeah, it always sucks. All right. So we'll finish up and we'll wrap up there. Again, join us next month, September 27th at 12:30 to talk more about sex, consent, assent, and orientation. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.